Okay, so this was a talk prepared by Anthony Tuffin for the Victoria Tasmania branch AGM. He began by thanking us and thanking us all for inviting him and saying that he feels very honoured. He also says good evening to us on what I hope has been a pleasant spring day from a lovely autumn morning here in the UK. This was written a few days ago, so I don't know how lovely it was today, but it certainly was lovely here. So he went on to say, I think it is important for electoral reformers to keep abreast of the reform movement internationally and to support each other. When one jurisdiction introduces reform, it encourages others. And although Anthony makes the point that he's critical of the UK's Electoral Reform Society for not concentrating more on its primary aim of getting STV for all elections, there should be credit for where it's due. And he's grateful to the ERS for producing the slides that he's using now. So UK supporters and opponents of PR alike, especially in England, tend to overlook that most of the UK's elections are not done by first past the post now, so that the mould of first past the post being the only way that elections are being done in the UK is broken. And he's going to talk in this talk about the many changes that have taken place over the last 100, but particularly the last 50 years, and talking about Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and even some elections in England, and also mention a near success for the House of Lords and end with an optimistic glimpse into the future. So the key aim remains single transferable vote for the House of Commons. Now, why is this? This is a little bit that I have added to it. So this is the most recent result in the House of Commons, where we see two very particular features. So one is that the Conservative Party wins control of the House of Commons with 56.2% of Commons members with 43.6% of the vote, and all the other parties which have a majority have much less than that. In particular, you will note that the Liberal Democrats, who have 11.6% of the support, have very few members in the House of Commons, and that, for example, the Scottish Nationalist Party has many more. So this is taken from the Wikipedia account because I think it gives a nice, easy picture. And the other thing that I will put in here is from Wikipedia, their map of the election. And what we see here is the overwhelming dominance of the Scottish Nationalist Party. That's the light yellow colour in Scotland. The Scottish Central Belt, for example, almost entirely Scottish nationalists. And this is, they have I think 47 out of 55 seats in Scotland, but that is with way less, that is with somewhat less than 50% support. So they're getting like 80% of the members with less than 50% of the support. So this is the problem that most people in Britain are concerned about. That's the election for the House of Commons that doesn't represent the voters' will. But the story in other places is different. So first of all, you can see on the slide here that Northern Ireland has the longest experience of using proportional representation. So STV was used between 1921 and 1925, was then replaced by first past the post, and then the parliament was abolished. You can see here when a new assembly was created in 1973, STV was used, but the assembly again collapsed. And since 1998, there have been 6 elections using STV. So I'll just go back to the notes here that the UK itself established the Northern Ireland Parliament to be elected by STV in the 1920s, but it was the devolved Parliament itself having the power to choose its own system. And so the Unionist majority switched to first past the post as soon as they could, which was from between 1925 and 1929. But however, since the reinstitution of the Assembly in 1998, and we are all aware that there were some troubles in Northern Ireland somewhat earlier, all the 6 elections have all been held using STV. Local authority elections have used STV. And while the UK was a member of the EU, European Parliament elections in Northern Ireland were held using STV, a different system from other parts of the country. So essentially all Northern Ireland elections were STV, even though the rest of the UK used first past the post. Now I put up here for you the result of the last STV election for the Northern Ireland Assembly, which was in 2016. I have this again comes from Wikipedia. I haven't put on don't have the vote percentages there, but you will notice from this some very significant differences from one region to another. So if we look at Belfast West, you see that 4 Sinn Féin, 1 Social Democratic Labour and 1 People Before Profit, that's at one end, and then Belfast East, a very different situation, 3 Democratic Unionists, 1 Ulster Unionist and 2 alliance parties. So this is something we've never seen in Australia, that 2 multi-member electorates which are almost next to each other are represented by 2 totally different parties, There's nothing in common between those 2. So Northern Ireland is, as we know, a very fractured area, and Belfast West is very Catholic and very nationalist, and Belfast East is very Protestant and very unionist. But the PR system, the STV system, has allowed for diversity of representation in that parliament in a way that first past the post never could. Okay, so moving to Scotland. So I'll just read through Anthony's notes here and you can look at the screen. So when the UK government established the devolved Scottish Parliament in 1999, and this incidentally followed a successful referendum that was held on the 700th anniversary of the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1997. Okay, when the UK government established the Parliament, it was worried that the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, would secure an overall majority on a minority of votes, something that first past the post single members achieves. So it decided the election should be by party PR and chose the AMS system. The voting system for local councils became a devolved power, and the Scottish government, although it's self-elected by the AMS or additional member system, chose STV for local councils in 2007. So the first Scottish local elections by STV in 2007 were held on the same day as the Scottish parliamentary elections by AMS. Anthony makes the point that using 2 systems for elections on the same day might have caused confusion, especially regarding the new system. But even though STV was new and AMS had been used before, there were more what he calls spoilt AMS than spoilt STV votes. That means, in our term, informal votes. So even though the people were used to the additional member system, they actually were able to use the new STV system more effectively. The current STV local election system was introduced when there was a Labor Liberal Democrat coalition government, with Jack McConnell being the then First Minister. So Willie Sullivan, who's the Senior Director Campaigns in Scotland for the Electoral Reform Society, added in an email which I received this morning that the ERS-backed campaign was called Fair Share, and Willie was the campaign consultant. It was legislated in 2003 and was used for the first time in 2007. So there is STV in Scotland, but only at the local level. Like the rest of Great Britain, Scotland used first past the post for the first couple of elections to the European Parliament, and then changed to a closed regional party PR list system. Willie also wanted to add, and this is a quote from him, "There have been motions at Scottish National Party conference about STV for Parliament. They were heavily defeated and spoken against by some of our important allies in the SNP, Scottish Nationalist Party, including Marco Biagio, despite it being Scottish Nationalist Party to support STV for public elections. The STV are very reluctant to change the system, and a very nuanced political approach is required if we are to make progress. There have been murmurings of trying to take councils back to first past the post within the SNP, Scottish Nationalist Party. So defending what we have is also very important. I'll just add to this point here that this is something we've seen before, that political parties that get elected by a particular system seem to think that it's a good idea to keep that system because probably they'll get elected by it again. This turns out to be very foolish thinking, and this is something which the Scottish nationalists might at some point come to regret. Okay, and this is the current map of the Scottish AMS election in 2016. So on the left, you see the individual seats, and these are all using the same divisions same constituencies as the Union Parliament, as the House of Commons, except that Shetland and Orkney are split into two. But as you can see from this, the Scottish Nationalist Party would win a substantial majority in its own right if there was just first past the post single members. But when you add the topping up, which is the additional members, and you can see in the 8 regions of Scotland, there are 7 additional members added to each of these regions. And you'll see that except in South Scotland, which is the area where the SNP did least impressively, almost all of the additional members are not SNP members. And this leads to a much more balanced parliament. And in fact, the SNP doesn't have an absolute majority because they did not get a majority of the votes. So this system, of course, is not as good as a single transferable vote, but it at least avoids what the Labor government in 1997 was hoping to avoid, which was domination by the SNP, with the SNP winning basically most of the seats, most of the constituencies in first past the post, as indeed they did in 2016. Okay, moving to Wales. So, and I'll again read the notes that Anthony has provided. Like the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senedd has been elected by Party PRAMS, that's the additional member system, since it was established in 1999. This was a Westminster decision done by the Parliament in Westminster in 1997 or 1998, but the voting system is now a devolved power. That means that the Welsh Senedd, which is the that's the Welsh word for Senate, I suppose, is able to change the system. And a Senedd committee has recommended a couple of months ago changing to STV. So move is heading in that direction. So the Senedd is now in the process of giving power to each local council to choose STV instead of first past the post for its own elections. So presumably there is going to be something else. In fact, he makes the point that these slides were prepared a couple of weeks ago. I should have changed them before going through this. And you can see that the third bullet point is now out of date. I can tell you that stage 3 was passed last week, and stage 4 is expected to be passed before Christmas, followed by royal assent next year. Then local councils will have the option to change from first past the post to STV. So we already have STV for every election in Northern Ireland. We already have STV for local elections in Scotland. And now there is a move to allow STV to be chosen by local authorities in Wales. Local elections are held every 5 years in Wales, and the next one are due in 2022. I'm advised that because of boundary reviews and the need to educate voters, STV would not come in for the 2022 elections, but for the 2027 ones. I guess the point here, known to us all, is that supporters of STV PR are nothing if not patient. The most interesting and encouraging feature of the bill is that a party in government is tabling legislation which includes STV. So the Labor Party is in power in Wales, although the cabinet also includes one Lib Dem member and an independent, formerly the Plaid Cymru, the sort of Welsh nationalist party.
Right.
Scotland and Wales, like Scotland, Wales used first past the post for a couple of elections to the European Parliament and then changed to a closed regional party PR list system. Okay, so England. Yes, here we go. So party PR AMS, that's again that additional member system which has single member electorates but sort of tops them up a little bit like the New Zealand MMP system, is used for London Assembly elections. The supplementary vote system has been held for the election of mayors, and I think that means, as well, let me read what Anthony said. Single office holders can't be elected by PR, but the supplementary vote is used to elect directly elected mayors and police and crime commissioners. This is Anthony's words now. I describe SV, that's supplementary vote, as the poor man's alternative vote, AV, which we in Australia know as preferential voting. It's an instant runoff between the top two of the first count if no one reaches half the votes. So this is the point I was making earlier, that some people believe that that's what preferential voting in Australia is. This supplementary voting system wouldn't allow a candidate who is in third position to be elected, even if that candidate was preferred by the majority. So it's better than first past the post, but to cast an informed vote, you have to guess who the top two candidates will be. And it doesn't work efficiently or fairly if more than two candidates have about the same number of votes at the first count. Nevertheless, there are other elections in which first past the post is not used. Like Scotland and Wales, England used first past the post for the first couple of elections to the European Parliament and then changed to the closed regional party PR list system. So I count that we have talked about at least 5 or 6 different electoral systems for different parts of it here, but it's certainly not all first past the post. This slide about the House of Lords, this relates to reform legislation in 2011-2012 and makes the point that the Conservative Cabinet Minister responsible for the legislation was persuaded by the Electoral Reform Society that the elected element of a new look chamber should be via STV. The Liberal Democrats supported that, but since the Conservatives usually support first past the post, this didn't get up, but it was noticeable that it was a Conservative member who had supported STV for the House of Lords. So in conclusion, Anthony wants to make this point. Every voter in the UK now has the opportunity to vote other than by first past the post in at least some, or at least one election. And in some parts of the UK, most elections are no longer by first past the post. So he wants to remind us that, he told us that most elections in Northern Ireland are STV now. Most elections in Scotland are not by first past the post, but are either the alternative, the AMS system, which is the Scottish Parliament, or STV, which is Scottish local government. The Welsh Senate elections are not by first past the post, but by AMS, that's this additional member system. And Wales is about to allow each local council to allow STV. And some elections in England are also not held by first past the post. So the mould of first past the post being the only way to hold elections is broken, and broken forever. Anthony concludes by saying, I believe the move from first past the post will continue, and I hope it will be towards STV. But I believe that the House of Commons will be the last domino to fall. To be realistic, I don't expect any major progress so long as the present government has an overall majority of 80 for only 43.6% of the votes in the country.
Thank you.
As I showed before. But that should not deter us from campaigning and building up our strength. I think UK reformers must encourage Welsh local councils to adopt STV when they have the power to do so, and start campaigning for STV to be used in English local elections, leaving the House of Commons to be the last public body in the UK still elected by first past the post. And Anthony concludes by thanking us for our time and listening to him, well, listening to his words given by me. And he said he'll hand you back now to the chairman, which is me handing it back to myself. What I will now do